Hello, my name is Jorb. I love gear. Today, we're talking about Strymon's Dig and Deco V2. I better be in frame. Strymon is a pedal powerhouse, and they have been since they started making pedals, I think in 2010. They've put out some of the most highly praised, highly regarded pedals ever. They helped push pedals forward and carved out a really comfortable place as the premium brand for a very, very long time. Even still, if somebody has the Timeline, the Big Sky, and the Mobius, the trifecta of their big box, high fidelity, do everything pedals, you know that that person's really serious. I fully believe they're probably the main reason that MIDI on pedals is as prevalent as it is today, and their pedals have been ready to work with line-level instruments from the start. Two things that make them very interesting to synth players. If you're subscribed, and you probably should be if you aren't, you've probably seen me pair this. This is a version 1 Strymon El Capistan with synthesizers of all sorts. And there was a hardware iteration of the V1s that let them work in stereo with TRS inputs, and they've always been ready to accept hot signals, line-level signals like you'll get from a synthesizer, as opposed to instrument level from something like a guitar or an electric piano. But the El Capistan and more pedals that look like this, the dual foot switches, have been updated to a version 2, and they added a lot of features that make them feel like they weren't released 10 years ago. Not that the El Cap does, but these do really feel like they were designed today. So all the pedals that have been updated gained a totally new DSP processor. They now have a analog preamp or input stage, full MIDI CC support, USB-C, and even an additional control on a lot of them. And also important, instead of having an internal jumper to go between mono and stereo inputs, there's just a switch right on the back, which makes it easier to use this in a synth setup where sometimes your signal is mono and sometimes you want to pass stereo through it. All that is very, very compelling to me, and I asked Strymon if I could have a few to show off. They very graciously said yes, and they let me choose. I chose the Dig and the Deco, not only because they're good specifically for synthesizers, I think so, but they also highlight what I think Strymon is best at, and that is flexibility. It's better than almost anybody else. So what are each of them? The Dig is an 80s rack delay inspired dual digital delay, while the Deco is a sort of tape tricks, we'll call it a royal flush. It's saturation and double tracking, and the double tracking lets you dial anywhere between flanging, chorus, and even short single slapback delays. Strymon did send these over for review, but of course, you know the drill. They do not get to tell me what to say. A lot of the things I'm going to talk about will apply to all of the version 2 Strymons, and a few of the things I talk about will also apply to the Volante and the Night Sky, which are sort of, you know, 1.5 of these guys wide pedals that Strymon has put out recently. If you're curious about the Volante, which is a very flexible tape delay, I have a video where I give it a lot of attention on its own. If you're curious about the Night Sky, tell Strymon that they should really send me one, and I'll do a video. That's not funny. So there you go. That's everything I'm going to talk about. No more exposition. Let's hear some sounds. Alrighty, we're going to start with the Dig. Everything's about at noon except for mix 2. Let me show you my dry sound. Nothing crazy, and here is our first example of delay. Super, super straightforward. The normal delay controls are time, repeats, and mix, tone on sum. So we're going to ignore time 2 and mix 2 for now and just treat this as a single delay. And this is no modulation and the highest fidelity model, so 24 kilohertz, or sorry, 24-bit, 96 kilohertz. Extremely bright, clean, and clear. Let's shift down to ADM, and I'm going to actually read exactly from the manual here what that is. It says, early 80s adaptive delta modulation process provides a percussive, wide-band delay, adding more character when input dynamics increase, which is something that doesn't change very much on this synthesizer. But let's listen really closely to where we were at first. Bright, clean, and clear, 2496. Swap models. I don't hear much of a difference, I'm going to be honest with you. But when we go down to 12-bit, I do notice a general loss in fidelity. and I like it there most of all, but I'll go back to the very clean ones to do some more demonstration. We had no modulation until now. Let me turn modulation on. And that's the first time I noticed some stereo-ness. To the delay, I do have the chorus off on the Juno, so it should be the same signal in the left and right. Very, very cool. Let's slow our whole sound down a little bit. Slow the time down. You hear the very, very nice time stretching. Turn up repeats. I want to hear the modulation. I want to hear the pitch changing. Just barely, and I hope you're listening with headphones so you hear what I'm talking about. There I really, really notice a stereo modulation. Great. So just on the panel, not even worrying about tap tempo, what is the longest possible delay time we have? Pretty long. When I really notice the stereo difference when I do that. And the shortest, that just sounds like a chorus to me, even. We're that fast. If I go mix all the way wet, will it just sound like vibrato? This could be a chorus, as I'm discovering right now. Let me get the mix up to include the dry signal. I'm quite fond of the lowest fidelity model, maybe just in abstract. I like that idea the most. Because I like the idea of things being old and idiosyncratic of the era. But that sounds quite good to me. And it's amazing how much just a delay can add to your sound and make it feel like a different thing. But it's not just a delay. This is two delays. By default, the time is a division, or it's related to time 1. So maybe if I turn up the mix on delay 1 and delay 2 is a little lower. Turn the time down. There we go. There's a sort of rhythmic pattern. Again, I find myself wanting to do sort of slow sweeping pads. Through this very nice, big, spacey, modulated delay. And that's sort of the like, oh, this isn't one delay, it's two delays. Now it's worth the money. It is, but it also sounds really cool. And the controls they give you are interesting. And the modulation makes it very, very rich in stereo. But there's so much more you can do beyond that. So the first question you should be asking with two delays is how are they routed? They've got really good sort of diagrams in the manual that explain a lot of things. And I first noticed that in the Volante. Strymon does a great job of that. But right now, the delays are in series. And so everything that happens in delay 2, shorten it faster. Right now, everything that happens in delay 2 is what then gets ran into delay 1. So you're delaying those delays, and that's where some of those rhythmic patterns come out. right? And each side, left and right, is independent. Man, even just that sounds really, really good. But there are some other options for the way you want to route the delays. And I think, I'm just going to guess, and if this is right, you guys can see me get it right. But the live edit, you hold the on button, and then you change mix 2 here. And so I believe this is series. This will be ping pong? That was correct. So the delays will sort of feed into each other. I have the diagram up. But the feedback from one crosses over into the next. I'll show you the diagram so you can really look at it. If I get them a little bit closer in time, maybe I slow them down a little bit more and I do another pad. Even more, a little darker sound. That's a really rich stereo experience already. So cool. There's also a parallel configuration where I'm going to go back into live edit. So I hold the on button, and when this turns red, the two delays are operating in parallel. So I'm going to turn mix 2 all the way down. Let's just listen. That's only on my right side. And delay 1 was only on my right side. And delay 2 is only on my left, and their feedback doesn't cross over. But all the controls still operate the same. Really, really cool. And now, a natural question would be, oh, well, I can separate their behavior in a bunch of other ways. Can I decouple the time? Can I decouple the repeats? And the answer to both of those questions is yes. So if we go back into live edit mode, and I change this all the way to red, and I click it on, we have totally separate delay times, currently because we're in parallel on our left and our right. I really, really hope you guys are listening in stereo. So completely separate. I could use this as 2 separate delays for 2 separate pedals. And I know you're wondering, oh, can you do the repeats as well? Yes, you can. Live edit and then change the repeats. And so from green up here through yellow, that is when delay 2 is independent, and red means they're connected. So I'll leave them connected for simplicity's sake. So to me, Dig was always just, I guess the way I perceived it, how about? Dig was always just, oh, this is 80s rack delays, and it has, those interesting time relationships. But after really sitting down and playing with it, I realized that this is 2 delays and dozens of ways for them to work with each other and dozens of ways for them to be routed differently. And the flexibility therein is really massive. So I showed you the chorus earlier. I'm actually going to go back to running these in series. So I'm live edit all the way green here, but I still have independent time on delay 2. So I'm just going to set that up as a chorus. A little less repeats, a little more time. Even a vibrato. Just call it modulation, how about? Because I want a little bit of dry signal in there. It's almost flanging. Let's make it a little longer. And I have no modulation here from the chorus. That is specifically what you're hearing from the Dig here. And I dialed in a delay on the first one. And so right now, this is modulation and delay, which is also modulated and in stereo. And I gotta say, I would use it as that. Yeah. I really, really do like that. That's kind of like window tour, like as fast as I could show you what the dig is and what the dig does without feeling like I'm missing anything. And there are other control flexibilities afforded to you with the live edit, and there are some settings you can get just at startup. But the amount of things you can do with 2 delay lines when they're this flexible, and they sound quite good, is really, really a lot more than it seems at face value. I'm thinking about building a pedal board for when I do live stuff, so I have a hands-on way to play with pedals and effect sounds, and I can change what the synth is without totally losing, built-in effects I was relying on. And I'm thinking I might bring the dig instead of the Volante, which I really was convinced that was what I wanted in a delay. But there's an element of flexibility to this that I really can't help but appreciate. Cool. Really, really good. So the dig is much more than I thought it was before trying one. And I think the first time I saw one, it was paired with synthesizers. It was a band called Channel, I believe. And there was somebody who was singing using an electric piano, like stage piano, like a Nord, ran through the dig for 80s rack delay stuff. And it was really, really impressive. And that's the first time it was ever really on my radar. Cool. I could play with just a delay for a very, very long time, but we must move on to the Deco. The Deco does 2 things. It is a tape saturator and a double tracker, and the whole idea is what sort of flexibility, what sort of tricks could you have when you double track, you record to 2 separate tape machines, whatever your source is. And part of my brain sees that as sort of tied to guitars intrinsically, but of course it isn't. So the first side and the side that makes a lot more sense is tape saturation. So let me make sure our levels are good here. I'm actually going to make this a little more percussive. Not quite so percussive. That will do. Tape saturation is tape saturation. Hear that? I'll turn it off. Very subtle. Let's crank it. Hear it? Let's give it some more high end. How about this? Let's leave the sustain all the way up. There you go. Cool. Just a little bit of grime. Glue everything together, That was classic. Think of that like a reel to reel. Let's move on to cassette. And the focus here, as I understand it, and I heard the designer, Pete Shelley, say, it's not necessarily a lo-fi thing. It's about tape compression. And it's about, a very nice cassette recorder's compression. And I don't think a synth is a great way to show you, so actually I'm going to plug this into my MPC and just run some drum beats through it, and you can hear and see the differences there. But I had the Deco a long time ago. I had the version 1 when I was still a guitar player, and I liked this side, the tape saturation side, but at the time, I didn't want an overdrive that was this expensive, and that's what I liked the most about this. And I still kind of stand by that. If you just want the Deco for drive, you know, a light drive, I don't think it really makes sense. If you really want light saturation for running other things through, it does an excellent job, but it's pretty expensive for something that's just adding, you know, a subtle amount of dirt. Does it mean it does a bad job? No. I just think it's sort of an unrealistic price if you're just interested in the tape saturator. But I, especially anymore, am much more fascinated by the double tracker. So I'm going to set this up in a way that you can really hear what it's doing. The way the double tracker works, picture our sound coming into the pedal and going out, but also going to a tape deck. And that tape deck introduces some amount of delay behind our original signal, our dry signal. And so the blend is between dry or your reference deck or your first tape head and the right side, which is the delayed one. So I'm going to put it in the middle for now. Let's just listen. And we have the time all the way back here. It is a single delay that is a little bit colored and a little bit further back. But if I hold a chord and bring it closer, it becomes modulation. So interesting to me. And wobble is a sort of not necessarily cyclical, but gentle random modulation of this lag time. So I put it right around 0 and I turn up the wobble. But if I put it right around 0 here, a little bit higher, and I don't press anything, you hear some phase interaction, you hear some phase canceling. If I introduce wobble, it's a very natural flanging. And a little bit further back, it's like chorus. And all the way, like I showed you in the beginning, it's delayed. And I think this is particularly fun if you have some existing understanding of that stuff, but also a great way to figure that stuff out if you don't. If you weren't clear on how delay makes flanging and chorus and the way their phase interactions matter to that, this is a great way to experiment it. So I'm going to show you just noise. We're going to turn off all the oscillators, so you can really listen to the way all these controls of phase and such affect what's happening to our sound. And I'll try and make sure I stay out of the way of the oscilloscope here. Actually, I'm realizing my microphone might have been straight up in front of it the entire time. If it was, I apologize, but I will not be going back. That is just noise. This is the double tracker. Very clear flanging, and flanging with the two signals in phase. That's what this control lets you manage here. So sum means they're in phase, invert means they're out of phase. So if I'm very precise on both lag time and blend, I can get it to totally cancel out. Or almost totally cancel out. But as I move blend to one side, it comes back. And that, combined with the difference in the lag time, can get you some more different sounds. So again, we're just on noise, but I've introduced wobble, so it'll move on its own. Noise down back to an actual pitch. Okay, and if I go back to sum, that's totally different. And coming from synthesizers and synthesis, we know, just like having two oscillators that are just barely out of pitch and drifting a little bit of their VCOs can be a very pleasing sound. That's effectively what you get on sum. And again, just to remind you, the dry signal Here we are double tracked. So it's modulation not different from chorus, not different from flanging, but achieved in a way that recognizes where it came from and achieved in a way that you control it in a way other than just manipulating depth and manipulating rate. And I really, really like that in concept. I really, really like that from the beginning. It's like, okay, what if this is a modulation element? What if this is a modulation effect? But the controls are all with consideration to how we can manipulate a tape deck and the way those things interact. Really, really cool. Together. Super, super cool. There are, of course, some other things we can do here. If I just hold on the double tracker foot switch, I'll turn off the saturator. That makes it an evenly cyclical auto flange, an evenly cyclical modulation. And again, just like the dig, there are a bunch of those, they call them live edit, but secondary functions that let this be more flexible. I don't necessarily think I need to show you all of them. There is one that I think is quite interesting. It's called wide stereo mode. Hold tape saturation to get into live edit, and then I turn this to the point where it turns red, and I select it. The way this works, let me put blend all the way to one side. Again, it really, really helps if you're listening in stereo. They call it the reference deck. Right now it's the signal I'm passing in. That's all the way to the left. And there's our delayed signal, or our copy deck, I guess, all the way on the right. So this is a good way to achieve like proper, as described, double tracking. Or if simply as I want it to be slightly delayed. That gives us more of a stereo image. Very, very, very cool. Okay, I'm going to go back in a live edit, and I'm going to turn off wide stereo mode. To show you the one thing I didn't show you, bounce in the types here. Bounce also achieves a sort of complex stereo image. And I have to be honest, when I just first listened and I first looked at the scope, I had trouble figuring it out. But let me show you. I have blend in the middle, so they should be equal volumes where our lag time is long enough that it is an actual delay. And let's watch the oscilloscope here. Even more time. You kind of hear that? And I'm going to bring lag time way up fast and introduce wobble. That is stereo modulation. And the way they describe bounce, the right channel of the lag deck is phase inverted and bounced to the left channel input. With mono output or wide stereo on, you get a double repeat effect. With wide stereo mode off, which we do now, there's a ping-pong-like stereo effect. The right channel of the lag deck. So right now they're both in mono, and I can't hold that one to go to live edit. It's this one. And I'm going to turn on wide stereo. We're going to listen. I'm going to turn time way up, wobble way down. And you can hear here in wide stereo, I hope again you're listening in stereo. We hear left, right, right. So it's like whatever comes out of that lag deck or that second deck gets fed back into the beginning of that channel. You know what I mean? So whatever delay happens, we hear it, and then it comes back. But with wobble on, it's a sort of stereo modulation again. You could think of it as simply as, I would like more of a difference in my left and my right. Because it will do that. While this is cool, interesting modulation, there's not a lot of stereo movement. because what I'm putting into it doesn't have much stereo movement. But if I introduce chorus, it's like an interesting monaural modulation on top of that stereo stuff. But it's like, oh, you know what? I would like this effect to be stereo. Here's bounce. And not worry about necessarily what it's doing. I think it does a great job. Very, very, very cool. Let's just turn everything on now because we can. Already that feels like a very full, complete sound, and it wasn't a pairing that I did intentionally, but it is just grit and modulation and delay, which, again, I didn't really talk about why these two together make so much sense to me, but there is an innate flexibility in both of them. And Strymon does a great job of giving you controls in such a way that lets you explore that, especially if you have a pretty good base level understanding of the principles behind these things. And if you don't, all the panel controls are good enough to still help you get cool and interesting sounds. And that to me is why I chose these two. Exploring the effects that would have been on synthesizers on the 70s, exploring the effects that might have been on synthesizers in the 80s. So cool. Okay, that's sort of big, like design level perspective abstract stuff that I really, really appreciate. Again, a window tour, speed mode look of each of these and why I think they work well with synthesizers. There are more sounds in each of them, I promise you. I'm not going to explore them now. I want to talk more technically about what's cool about these version 2s and why I think they're even more compelling to pair with synthesizers than before. They have stereo inputs now. They didn't always, and if they did, it was a jumper you had to move on the inside of these pedals. I know there's some versions of the earliest Strymon pedals that wouldn't take a TRS input, but these do, and to get there you just need to change a switch on the back from mono to stereo input, which is really, really helpful, but they will work in mono or stereo. You just need to make sure you understand which one you're throwing into it and which one you expect to come back out. That's great, and a flexibility I really like if I'm going to be using these things with synthesizers where some are mono and some are stereo. As far as other connectivity, I'm going to change what's actually on screen right now. I need to film a slight correction. So the first time I plugged in MIDI, so it's DIN out of the Live 2 into a Type A MIDI to TRS adapter, and then that is just into a headphone adapter, into the 1/4-inch jack on the Dig. The first time I tried it, it didn't work, but I was sitting there editing, and I was looking at the pinouts for each, a Type A adapter and the MIDI that Strymon pedals take, and it really looked like it should work, so I sat down here to try it again, and lo and behold, it does. So if I can bypass there, change time there. So I do go on to show examples of MIDI using USB, but I'm going to cut out the whole bit where I said, oh, it's a huge shame you can't use just a TRS adapter, because you can, and either intentionally or not, that makes it really, really interesting for us hardware guys. Okay, back to the video. We can use MIDI over USB. I go to menu, I change my MIDI port to, actually, that is out of focus. I know I'm not changing anything else. It says Dig MIDI 1. So now, for sure, it recognizes it if I use USB. Is this even visible? Kind of. If I go to menu, Q-Link edit, and I want this to be a MIDI CC parameter, let's say 102. I bring it down to 0, that's our bypass. Great, and if I change this all the way down to, I think it was 12, that is our time. And this is a little thing I've demoed a lot of times. But MIDI control over these parameters is not just I can control them remotely, I can automate them. Which is a really ridiculous amount of power when you consider how deep these pedals really, really can be. Super, super, super cool. The MIDI CCs even lets you get to a couple other options that are sort of the live edit options, but quicker because we can get to them through CCs. Delay one subdivision to the tap tempo without getting in there. Series, ping pong, or parallel. Actually, I might as well set that up right now. So I've set up now a MIDI CC to control series, parallel, or ping pong. There we are in series. If I just go up a single CC, which I wish it was a whole range and not just a single click. That's ping pong. One more. Now we're in parallel. So again, cool that I have control of that in this way, and something you can change over time in a coordinated jam, or if you're working with a DAW, you can have this be doing processing and still be something you can control hands-on, but changing those at predictable intervals. Really, really cool. But of course, it isn't just MIDI CCs. I could send clock to this or program changes. And actually, what if I go just see if there's any programs to change from right now? Yeah, you see the tap tempo is adjusting as I click through program changes. And program 1. So there are presets here, there are favorites in here. And this is one of the points where you begin to realize there's an amount of depth between these 6 knobs, 4 switches, counting the toggles up there, that there are a lot of features that are tough to get to. And something like the Volante, with just that much more ability to control it from the panel, does kind of change the way you end up interacting with it. I think MIDI to control program changes is awesome and a cool feature. The Strymon sells the favorite switch and the multi-switch plus, which lets you do it with foot controls. But to me, buying an additional thing just to get to presets is sort of a shame. In fact, I'm not even sure how to get to favorites without looking in the manual, and I don't even think I'm going to do it, because it highlights my point enough that even though these are intuitive and hands-on, and even though there's a lot of things you can get to through the panel, there is a point where it might not be worth it to you as a certain type of user. I think because of all the power-up functions that are important, and not that you need to change them often, but you will need to change them at some point, combined with the live edit or the secondary functions, combined with things like favorites, Strymon pedals work well with somebody who's prepared to sit down and configure and figure out what this needs to be set up as to work for them, or remember the sort of options or the sort of things they'd want to change in the middle of a session or the middle of a jam. Hopefully not in the middle of a live performance. But Strymon pedals work really well if you take the time to learn all of the things that they can potentially be doing, because they are extraordinarily deep when you consider what you have just on the panel, which is good and bad. Just to highlight a few more things about MIDI, I could send MIDI in over USB, and then if I configure out to be sent from the DIG, I can use a normal TRS jack to send MIDI out also into the Deco, and I could put them on different channels and send them different program changes or send them different CCs over time. Again, I think that would be cool to demonstrate, but I think if you know that's important to you, you'll know what you can do with it. So yes, a lot of what I just talked about is specific to the V2s. There are V1s that will take stereo in the exact same way. A TRS jack in, if you're splitting it to dual TS, of course, that's fine. But the MIDI CC stuff doesn't work, and I think favorites work a little bit differently. I know you don't have nearly as many presets you can stave on the version 1s. I can see a lot of people who would see the features of the V2 and say, yes, I absolutely need that. I really need MIDI CC over all the knobs. I really need more presets. Maybe the design of the specific Strymon pedal gained something in the version 2 that really, really matters to you. But I think a lot of people would be fine getting a version 1. And if you don't need the extra presets, I think it is 128 presets. If you don't need 128 recallable presets, and they will take stereo in, and I used my version 1 El Capistan with line level signals for a very, very long time. So I think this is a refresh than it is a redesign. And considering how good these pedals were and how good these pedals continue to be, I think that's the right move for Strymon. These are legendary and people have been using them, and they have a sort of following or fans of their own. They're people who like the Dig. They're people who like the Deco. And to update them in the way they did makes a ton of sense. If the Strymon pedals came out now in 2022, what would they do differently? They would have the MIDI implementation they do. They would have MIDI CC, and they would all have a little bit more control. So I think Strymon has done an excellent job in bringing these up to modern paces. I do think it makes them in some ways more appealing for synthesizer users or people who are working with, MIDI heavy setups. It doesn't necessarily make them that much better. But I think still a lot of people would be fine to continue on with the V1 or get a used V1. Yes, all the updates are good and all the updates make sense, but I could probably continue to use my El Cap stand and be fine, especially if I didn't get the Volante. But I think the refresh is not a must upgrade if you already have a V1. If you're curious about Strymon because the new V2 things came out, stop and think. Do you really need the features afforded to you in the V2 and maybe get a used V1? But I do legitimately believe there are users who, now that these have been changed in certain ways, they are suddenly much more compelling to them. I can totally understand somebody who sees USB-C for firmware updates and MIDI control and all the presets as what they need in a pedal and what they need in a pedal for live or for in the studio. So good for Strymon to update these in a way that they can continue selling the same very, very good designs or similar, now updated, to even more people and have even more people use them and love them. So, you know what? That's all I got to say. I think these are excellent. Strymon, thank you very much again for letting me have these. Hope you guys enjoyed this. Check out the Dig, check out the Deco. Thanks for watching. Cheers and so long.